incoming bracket!
What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is, of course, part of a series where I focus on a specific director and rank that director's work from worst to best. You guys can check down below. I've done such directors in the past, such as Christopher Nolan, Alfonso Cuarón, among many others. So again, check that out in the playlist down below. But guys, you clicked to this video so you know what this time around I focus on Guillermo Del Toro's films and ranking them from worst to best. He's done 10 movies, so I'll be ranking them from 10 being his worst to 1 being his best, and of course, my opinion. But also, guys, before I get into the list, I wanted to let you guys know I'm very curious to hear your guys' thoughts on what his ranking is down below in terms of your personal opinion, because let's face it, we all have different opinions and rankings of said director. So, all that exposition aside, guys, let's kick things off with my personal number 10. My number 10 is Mimic. Mimic is very unmemorable for myself. I saw it a year ago, and if I had a gun to my head, I would not be able to say what this movie's about. I found it to be very forgettable, unfortunately. Technically speaking, it is decent, but that's all I really remember. I know it has a cult following, and I know that a lot of people seem to enjoy this movie, but when I saw it a year ago, literally right after watching it, it was very vapid. I barely remember it. In fact, I might have even said that in my Letterboxd review when I, actually watched this a year ago. It's whatever. Again, if people like this movie, and I know that there are some people out there because it does have a cult following, that's okay. It's just for myself. Wasn't the biggest fan of it, and that's why Mimic is number 10. Next up, my number 9 is Blade 2. Now, this movie I was able to get behind. I didn't see the first Blade. I saw the Blade 2. The only reason being, honestly, is because I wanted to watch all of Del Toro's movies. In Blade 2, for some reason, the Blade movies in general, I didn't really have any interest in it, which is, again, why I'm glad that I had to rank Del Toro's movies, because it gave me a reason to watch Blade 2. And Blade 2 is a lot of fun. The vampire action is really good. Honestly, it's a good vampire movie in general. And I mean, I'm saying that too as someone that's seen the Twilight movies. And let me tell you, when people think of vampire movies, they think of Twilight. And that's kind of sad because they should probably be thinking about Blade 2 specifically. I also really like Wesley Snipes' performance. I really don't know how the MCU is going to top, Wesley Snipes' the lead performance. And I'm saying that as a fan of the new Blade in terms of the actor. But this is a fun movie. It's very much so a contained movie that's very enjoyable. And yeah, I would definitely say watch it. It's only lower on this list, number 9, because Del Toro is someone that is very enjoyable in terms of his movies. And next up, that was my number 9, Blade 2. My next up is number 8, which is Hellboy. And Hellboy I liked a little bit more than Blade 2, surprisingly. I think what Hellboy I liked a bit more was the fact that it's in the superhero genre, but it doesn't really feel like a superhero movie, truth be told. It feels more of like a monster movie, per se, or like a monster movie mixed in with action. But it holds up on its own, and I do appreciate this movie, and I love the monster design. I think the monster designs are just great. The creature designs, truly something to behold. I quite enjoyed it for that aspect, yet alone. It's enjoyable stuff, truth be told. So that's my number 8. Next up, my number 7 is Cronos, which, gotta be honest, Cronos, I have had on my watch list for quite some time. And I just kept on putting it off, despite it being on HBO Max and having it on my watch list of said, site. But I finally decided to watch it. Actually, literally, of the filming of this video, I literally watched it last night. And watching it, I was like, why did I put this off? Why? Because it's actually quite enjoyable, especially when you think about it. Watching this, and I think it was 1993, I believe it was when it came out. Watching it then, I can only imagine what people were thinking, because like you watch it and you clearly can see that this is someone that has a vision. This is someone that is very special with how they direct it. Like you see all of his trademarks early on, the villain that, is like a second in command, so to speak, and then he ends up becoming first in command. That's something that Del Toro ends up doing later on in his career. And it's kind of interesting to see that he had that, as well as just like, the attention to details and the obsession with like makeup. It's just great, honestly. It's great. It had its own style even back then. And despite being low budget, I will say, in terms of negatives, I wasn't the biggest fan of the fact that there was narration at the beginning, which is something that Del Toro does. It's a style, but I felt like with this movie, it did not work. And I say that because I felt like they should have taken that out. If they had taken that out, we as the audience, I actually looked it up. We wouldn't have found out about the stuff that was explained a minute in until like 30 minutes or so in. And to be honest, 30 minutes or so in is the end of the first act. And I think that that's when it would have been a better time to execute it. But again, I'm not Del Toro, but that's just for myself. I wish that they had executed it right there. But as it stands, Cronos, it is quite enjoyable and great debut, honestly. But as a film as a whole, it's okay. But again, as a debut, Del Toro, very proud. So that's my number 7. Next up, my number 6 is Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. This movie is quite enjoyable, and I do like it a bit more than the original Hellboy. I think what I like a bit more is that the stakes are a bit higher. Not only are the stakes a bit higher, but there's more world building. There's more expansiveness to it. And that, I think, is one of the only reasons needed, honestly, to say it's better than Hellboy. But also, Ron Perlman gives an even better performance. There's just a lot of fun to be had with this movie. And it's not amazing by any means, but I did quite enjoy it. And from a technical aspect, it's a feast to behold, for sure. So that's my number 6. Next up, my number 5 is Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim, let me tell you, is a movie that I did see in theaters. I believe it was an IMAX, and I quite enjoyed it. I think I might have seen it once or twice on DVD after that, or maybe I don't think Blu-ray. But either way, I've never been a huge fan of this movie, but one thing I did always love about it was I thought that, honestly, the music was just incredible, which is something I wanted to mention. The other entries I mentioned, the music is just not really that memorable. But Pacific Rim is above those movies for the fact that the music is memorable, among many other reasons. I also think that it does such a great job with the scale of, like, obviously the kaiju. I think that's very interesting. I think that it also stands out on its own from being, like, compared to, like, Godzilla. Like, I think that it does a good job of that. Not only that, but characters are clearly having a lot of fun. It does follow a certain archetype in terms of, like, disaster cliches per se, but it is a fun movie for sure, and that's why it is my personal number 5. Also, Idris Elba's speech is on point. Next up, my number 4 is a movie that I do want to own. I unfortunately don't just yet, but my number 4 is Crimson Peak, which I honestly think that if you go into it thinking it's going to be an all-out horror movie, I think you'll be disappointed, because I know I was a little bit disappointed by that because it was advertised as a horror movie, and what you get instead is a gothic horror, a gothic romance. Although I will say there are elements of horror, but it's not at the forefront. And that's why I want to give it another shot, because I've only seen it since theaters, and I remember in theaters I thought it was solid. I think I gave it like a 7 out of 10, but I feel like I would get more out of it because there are certain shots, especially involving violence, that I quite remember, but also just the attention to detail and the usage of color, specifically red towards the end, I thought was really cool. And again, I just feel like I owe it to Del Toro to give this movie a second chance because, again, so much effort and details is put into it, and I still remember it, despite obviously wanting to revisit it with fresh new eyes. Because, like I said, you go into a movie knowing it's going to be a certain genre and it ends up not being that, those are going to sway your expectations and honestly what you honestly get out of it. And that's why, again, I want to give it another chance. But that's my number 4. Next up, my number 3 is The Devil's Backbone, which I recently, less than a year ago, picked up The Devil's Backbone on Criterion Blu-ray. This movie I think is really good, very underrated. You rarely hear people talk about it. It's really good stuff though. It serves as like a template, I would like to say, for another movie that he would later make. I'm not going to say it just yet because I don't want to spoil that, but I'll mention this a bit later on. But anyways, Devil's Backbone, I think it's very underrated. I personally got a lot out of it. I think it's really good stuff. It's a good ghost story per se, even if it appears to be something else at first. But yeah, Devil's Backbone is my number 3. Really good movie. Next up, my number 2 is The Shape of Water. And The Shape of Water, almost forgot to pull up the 4K. The Shape of Water is a really entertaining movie, but more importantly, it's a very important movie. It's a movie that has a lot on its mind. It's a movie that also balances a lot of genres. Devil's Backbone also does that, and Crimson Peak, I also mentioned, does it. And Del Toro is someone that is a master of that. I do think that the first several entries I mentioned, he doesn't do that really. He has it where it's like there's like a backdrop of like horror, but most of it's fantasy. But with Shape of Water, there are just so many things going on, so many wheels spinning. It is a thriller. It is a heist movie. It is obviously a drama. It's a creature film. It's a fantasy. It does have elements of horror. It's a lot, and somehow Del Toro makes it work. And that's why I love the movie. I get a lot out of it, and every single time I watch it, it brings joy to me. And I love it. Del Toro did a great job with this, and I'm glad that it won Best Picture. So next up, my number 1, I know it's a lot of people's number 1, and I apologize if it sounds cliche, but I don't care because it's one of my favorite movies of all time to begin with, so sue me. And most of you probably knew it was my number 1 anyways, but my number 1 is Pan's Labyrinth. This movie is a masterpiece. We'll never forget the first time I saw it, and every single time I watch it, I always say the same thing. I can't give it anything less than a 5 out of 5. It is a masterpiece. It is incredible. I remember when I saw it, I said to myself, this is the best fantasy besides Lord of the Rings. And now I say it might be my favorite fantasy film. It might be. I love it. Obviously, I'm not going to say if it is 100% because I do have to do a top 10 fantasy films list, but again, this movie's great. And what I said by Devil's Backbone is that it's a template. I think that personally, and I haven't done any research on this, but I feel like Devil's Backbone did a lot of heavy lifting for Pan's Labyrinth, because there's a lot of elements that Devil's Backbone has that would later be expanded on in Pan's Labyrinth in a good way. There's a lot of similarities between these two movies, but they're able to stand out from each other because they're focusing on different genres. And honestly, also the acting and the writing helps out a lot with the differences, and color palettes, a lot of different stuff. But in terms of, if you break it down in terms of like the plot, they are kind of similar, but they're both great movies. But I like Pan's Labyrinth a bit more. Actually, no, not a bit more, a lot more. But I just wanted to say that because I wasn't sure if anyone else noticed that. But, you know, Pan's Labyrinth, it's a masterpiece, and that's why it is my number one. But yeah, guys, that is my ranking of Del Toro's work. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts down below on my list, as well as what yours is for his. Again, rank them 10 to 1. If you haven't seen all his work, nonetheless, still rank what you have seen down below. And as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. The subscription, notification bell, and I'll catch you guys later.